Well, welcome to your very first biology podcast, Section 1-1, What is Science? When you're taking notes on your particular sections, you'll want to have your vocabulary sheet out along with your note sheet so that as you're going along and I point out key vocabulary words, that you can write those definitions on your vocabulary sheet as well as the notes on your note sheet. Okay, let's get started. What is science? So here is your very first vocabulary word. Science is using evidence to learn about the natural world. And you've probably had some sort of science class ever since you've been in kindergarten. So this isn't really any new type of topic for you. The question is, what are the goals of science? And there are 3 goals. Goal number 1 is to investigate and understand the natural world. Goal number 2, explain events in the natural world. And finally, goal number 3, use explanations to make predictions. And all of the different branches of science are going to focus on these 3 goals when they are doing some sort of experiment. Thinking like a scientist. Science always starts with an observation, not with the letter S. So, what is an observation? An observation, and once again, here is your next definition. An observation is the process of gathering information in a careful and orderly way. The question is, how do we do this? Well, we use our senses. And there are 5 senses that we have. Sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste. So we use our 5 senses, sight, hearing, touch, smell, and taste, in order to make observations. Your next vocabulary word is data. The definition of data, which I'm sure you've heard before, is information gathered from an observation. Well, there are going to be 2 types of data. The first type of data is called quantitative data. And quantitative data means numbers. For example, there are 7 birds at the bird feeder. So quantitative means something that we count. Or another word, or the root word, would be quantity. Quantity. That would be some way that you can remember quantitative. The second type of data that we gather is called qualitative. And this type of data is a description using characteristics that cannot be counted. So, an example of qualitative data would be the bird has a red head. So if we observe the bird up here, that would be the type of data that we can collect. The bird has a red head. So once again, the difference between quantitative data and qualitative data is that in quantitative, we're counting, and in qualitative, we're using a description. The next definition is called inference. And an inference is a logical interpretation based on prior knowledge and experience. So when we make an inference about something, that would mean that we have an idea or some background before we make that particular inference. Next definition is going to be hypothesis. And I know that these things are probably words that you've heard before. So once again, even though you've heard them, please write down these definitions. A hypothesis is a proposed scientific explanation for a set of observations. And you may have at some point in time heard it referred to as an educated guess. And before we can do any type of experiment, we need to come up with hypothesis. And as you're going to be doing some future labs, that's one of the key things that I'm going to require of you is that you formulate some type of hypothesis. Your next vocabulary word right here is called prediction. And I'm sure that you know what that particular word means. The expected outcome of a test, assuming the hypothesis is correct. So we're going to say what may occur, that would be predict something. Now, all of these types of activities are tested through what's called a controlled experiment. And in the notes that you're going to be taking for section 1-2, we will talk more about what constitutes or makes up a controlled experiment. And that is very, very important. Now, science involves many things. Science involves society and the economy that it provides. Because without science, we would not have jobs, we would not have food, and we would not have a place to live. So once again, science provides us with many different forms of jobs. It helps in the food industry, and it helps with buildings and forming a particular type of community. So that's very, very important to remember, is that there are many, many different branches of science. Finally, laws and morals need to be considered when making final decisions. Whenever we're doing any type of drug testing or anything like that where it involves human life or even animals, we need to make sure that specific laws and morals are followed before we can make the final decision. That concludes your first biology podcast. Now that you've completed this, you will want to take your formative assessment